Do the Panthers have the best running back duo in the NFL? People are asking, and we'll talk about it right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday as we are in off-season mode here on the show. In a couple weeks, though, we'll be back to Monday through Friday and talking about your team every day, which is our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show right here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to hit me up over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council. The mailbag right now is in hiatus, but we'll be back sooner rather than later. You can still hit me up in my DMs on Twitter at Julian Council, or just hit me up over on Blue Sky at Julian Council as well. We're back for another position group preview heading into the 2025 season for your Carolina Panthers. On Monday, we talk about Bryce Young and the quarterback position. Can Bryce Young live up to the hype after the end of last season, what he did in the final 9 weeks of the year, where he was arguably one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL? And according to PFF, he was a top 5, top 6 quarterback during the second half of the season. Can he do that again this upcoming year in 2025? Go check out that episode on YouTube and wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. But today, we're going to be talking about the running back position in Carolina, and one that I'm really excited to see what this group's going to look like. And honestly, go back to April of 2024. I was excited then about what this running back group would look like in 2025, more so than I felt like last year in 2024. Chuba Hubbard was heading into the final year of his rookie deal. There's questions about whether he would stick around here in Carolina. Miles Sanders was a gigantic disappointment his first year in 2023. Frank Reich no longer being here. Deuce Staley no longer being here. Very clearly, he was not going to be sticking around in Carolina after this upcoming season or after last season. But still, you thought, all right, use him, abuse him, then lose him. That would be the tandem, while Jonathan Brooks, a second-round pick from Texas, the first running back to go up the board in that 2024 NFL draft, he would eventually be ready to go later on in the season, and then he would fully be healthy and have some experience in the tail end 2024 to come into this offseason and ahead of this season with potentially Chuba Hubbard back, and with him in the backfield and having a nice little smash and dash double trouble 2.0 here in Carolina. Unfortunately, as we know, Jonathan Brooks retore that same ACL in his third game here at Carolina, tearing it in Philadelphia. He is now out for the entirety of this upcoming season. He's on the physically unable to perform list and is out for the year. So now Carolina brings in Rico Dowdle, who's coming off of a really nice season last year in Dallas. They have Chuba Hubbard back coming off of a career year here in Carolina. And my excitement is still the same, even though there's questions about the future at the position, even with Chuba having signed a 4-year deal midway through last season. Still wondering how are things going to play out with Jonathan Brooks. But they do have Trevor Etienne, who they just drafted in the 4th round a month and a half ago at this point in time, up in Green Bay during the 2025 NFL draft. But the question people are asking about this position group, at least what I'm asking, maybe some fans are asking, do the Panthers have the best running back duo in the NFL? Like, you look at the numbers. Last year, it's inarguable, in my opinion, that Chuba Hubbard was a top 10 back in the NFL. Clearly, that was the case. Career high in rushing attempts at 250, a career high in rushing yards, 1,195, which were 12th and 8th, respectively, in the NFL. So if you want to say, oh, he was in a top 10 back because he didn't have top 10 amount of rushing attempts last year, your argument's invalid. He rushed for over 2,000 yards over the past 2 seasons in 23 and in 24. And I brought this up throughout last season when looking at Chuba having his breakout. He was one of the top backs when you look at rushing success rate in the NFL, which means on first down, instead of getting only 1 yard, he's getting 5 yards. On third down, if it's 3rd and 4, he's picking up that first down. He's having successful runs. He had successful runs 54.8% of the time last year. That's fifth among running backs with at least 200 plus carries last season. He had the 19th highest grade running back grade according to PFF, but he had the 9th best rushing grade. So running back grade is going to take into account your blocking ability, which he missed on some blocks last season. It's going to take into account your receiving ability, which is not what he does. But as a pure runner of the football, PFF said he was one of the top 10 guys in the NFL, and the stats as well, rushing yards, bear that out. And he was rewarded midway through last season, heading into that game against the Giants in Munich, signing a 4-year, $33.2 million extension, and then had a career day that Sunday, 28 carries, 153 yards, and a touchdown. Y'all know how I feel about running backs getting paid anything above league minimum or federal minimum wage, no overtime, no holiday pay, none of that. I understand why the Panthers did this with Chuba Hubbard, and I don't actually hate it. And if you look at it now, kind of prescient that they did, because Jonathan Brooks was not ready to go then. He was ready to go after the bye week against Kansas City. He showed a little bit of that burst that the Panthers were hoping to see when they drafted him out of Texas against the Bucs. And then unfortunately, it came to a awful end there in Philadelphia. And we have no idea what he's going to be able to do here. And there's still questions about the rest of the group, whether Rico Dowdle comes back for another season in 2026, what happens with Trevor Etienne moving forward. But right now, Chuba Hubbard is clearly RB1, but he's going to have to share the backfield with a player who's also coming off of a career high in rushing attempts and rushing yards, as Dowdle rushed the ball 235 times last year, had 1,079 rushing yards, but only 2 rushing touchdowns on the ground. Maybe that will improve this upcoming season for all the fantasy football owners out there. We'll see. His rushing success rate was also way up there. We talked to Marcus Mosier of Locked On Cowboys last month when he's trying to get to know some of these newcomers that were signed during free agency. And he had mentioned he looked at Chuba up there all the time when it came to rushing success rate. And Rico Dowdle was also there a ton of the time too, as he was right behind Chuba. Matter of fact, 53.6% of the times he had a successful run. That's among running backs of at least 200 plus carries a year ago. And he was the 22nd highest graded running back in the NFL. So considering the fact that you have 2 guys coming off of career years now in this backfield behind that offensive line, bringing everybody back, it kind of makes you feel like the Panthers may have the best running back duo in the NFL. Now, do they have the best running back duo in the NFL heading to 2025? I'm not so certain you can say that at this point in time, just looking back at some of the PFF grades from a year ago. Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier down there, I-85 South in Atlanta, both those guys ranked in the top 8 of PFF. Now, only Bijan had 1,000 yards rushing, while Tyler did not get to that point last season, but still, PFF considered both those guys top 8 backs in the NFL a year ago. Detroit, who was an absolute wagon before having all those, I guess, the wagon spokes, the wheels being broken throughout the season. They had Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, who also, they were in the top 10 last year, according to PFF, and I just love Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. Also a great story there. You look over in Green Bay, Emmanuel Wilson and Josh Jacobs were both in the top 12 among backs last year. Derrick Henry and Justice Hill in Baltimore, they were top 15. And then in the division as well, in Tampa, Bucky Irving, who went nuts against Carolina here in Charlotte back in November. He and Rachaad White, they both ranked in the top 25, much like Rico Dowdle and Chuba Hubbard. And in Buffalo as a nice solid trio in James Cook, Ty Johnson, and Ray Davis. And probably why Brandon Beane is not trying to pay James Cook the kind of money James Cook alleges to want at this point in time, which is the right way to go about it when you have a talented, deep backfield. Now, all that's true as far as, how PFF evaluated them, that the Panthers did not necessarily have the top duo incoming this year when you look at just last year. But they do have the only 2 running backs. Got to put that out there. The only 2 running backs in the NFL that are in the same backfield that rushed for 1,000 yards last season. So whether they end up being the top rushing duo in the NFL, which I don't know if I'm comfortable enough to say that. I look at Gibbs and Montgomery and also that offensive line in Detroit and think that they're probably the top tandem. And in the NFC South, looking down at Atlanta and in Tampa, 2 really good running backs, 2 good backfields as well as far as running back rooms go for the Falcons and the Bucks. It's possible that Carolina's not even with Chuba and Rico top 2 or the number 1. But they absolutely could get there behind the approach that maybe Dave Canales will live by this season and being stubborn to run the football and behind that offensive line, but also just the talent that Chuba and Rico have. So I don't think anyone is going to sit here and say that Chuba Hubbard is the best running back in the NFL or Rico Dowdle is the best running back in the NFL. That does not mean that these guys cannot end up being the best duo in the league this upcoming season. And I do think they have a great chance to be right up there with the other duos that I talked about there in Atlanta, in Detroit, in Green Bay, in Baltimore, throw in, I guess, Lamar as well, in Tampa and in Buffalo. Really excited to see what these guys can do this upcoming season. And gosh, good backfield the Panthers got going on here in 2025. What about the rest of the group? Who do they have here and what roles will they be able to play? And is one Raheem Blackshear in danger of making the roster? We'll talk about that here in just a moment on Locked on Panthers. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. There's a solid argument to be made that the Panthers have one of the best running back duos in the NFL heading into 2025, and quite possibly the best running back tandem in the league heading into this upcoming season. Let's take a look, though, at the rest of the position group, starting off with Raheem Blackshear, who's back for another year in Carolina. There's some questions about whether they were going to re-sign him as a guy to battle again for a kick returner position. And understand this, he has 15 rush attempts last year for 80 yards. All of those came in the final 3 weeks of the season when Chuba missed the last 2 of a calf injury, with Jonathan Brooks out, with Miles Sanders injured and coming back in week 18. It wasn't until the tail end of the year when Raheem Blackshear was called upon to actually be a rusher of the football. He's primarily a return guy his first couple of years here in Carolina. And looking at his return numbers, we talked about this earlier on in the offseason. Maybe you checked it out, maybe you didn't. But the numbers were not great. He had 25.5 yards per kickoff return last year, which was 20th in the NFL. League average was at 27.6 yards per kickoff return. So down below that by 2.1 yards per return. He had by far the most kickoff returns last year in the NFL with 31, and they had changed kickoff rule and they wanted to see more guys return it. And Blackshear had the most returns, but did not end up being the best of those guys. And you can also look at, okay, certain guys had more or less than him, but still, if you look at Kevontae Turpin, who was a Pro Bowler and first team All-Pro last year, he averaged 33.5 yards per kickoff return. That's 8 more yards, nearly a first down more. And understanding that you're getting the ball at a closer position than you were in years past, that's significant, that kind of number from Kevontae Turpin. That just shows you a guy who is a Pro Bowler, what his numbers were compared to a guy who was below league average in terms of returning kicks last season. Now you look at punt returns, Raheem Blackshear averaged 8.5 yards per punt return. That was 21st in the NFL. League average was 9.9 yards. Marvin Mims and Khalif Raymond, who were the top 2 Pro Bowl selections, or All-Pro selections rather, they averaged 15.7 and 13.8 last year. It does not sound that significant, 5 yards, 7 yards, but it is. So Raheem Blackshear, by all accounts, just based off of the simple stats put out there by the NFL Pro Football Reference, he was below league average as a kickoff returner and a punt returner. Looking even at PFF, he had a 56.0 overall return grade. That ranked 173rd out of 212 players who returned a single kick last year. Just a single kick. So for a guy who returned a lot of kicks to be ranked that low among guys who maybe only returned 1 or 2, and I understand you might want to take those guys out, but still, Like, that's pretty low of a grade, 56.0 for a guy who's your primary returner. Just looking at kickoff grades in general, it's worse, 54.3. That was 163rd out of 187 guys who returned one single kickoff at the very least. And in punt returns, that was better, 62.8. That was 45th out of 85. So just looking at those numbers, do you want Raheem Blackshear, who by all accounts was a below average kickoff and punt returner, coming back and being your primary returner again this season? Maybe, maybe not. But the drafting of Jimmy Horn Jr. in the 6th round, and also Trevor Etienne, calls into question whether Raheem Blackshear will have that job again this season in Carolina. And speaking of Trevor Etienne, he's also in this backfield, the 4th round pick from the University of Georgia by way of Florida, where he started off his first 2 years. Through 3 seasons in Gainesville and in Athens, he rushed for 2,081 yards and always had to share a backfield, spent time in Florida with Montreal Johnson in the backfield, and last year Georgia, just a bunch of guys that were back in there. But he still was able to be 3rd team all SEC in his lone season under Kirby Smart with the Dogs. Led the team with 9 rushing touchdowns, started 10 games, only rushing for 609 yards, which doesn't wow you. He did miss 3 games last year with a rib injury. He also missed the season opener due to a DUI arrest that the charges were later on dropped in July. And he had to, I think he still, I guess, has a 12-month probation and fine as we're coming up on July here of 2025. So I don't know if there was any concern about that, I guess, character issue wise, but still, talented player, has some good bursts. His brother Travis was excellent at Clemson, former 1st round pick, still down there in Jacksonville with the Jags. The hope is that Trevor can be, at least to me, that 3rd down back heading into the season. Because you look again, last year at Raheem Blackshear, he had only 15 rush attempts, 0 targets out of the backfield. I do not think that would be the case for Trevor Etienne behind Chuba Hubbard and behind Rico Dowdle this upcoming season. I do think that that would be the role that he's able to carve out potentially, and also maybe as a returner. He did not return kicks at all last year at Georgia. He did do so his 2 seasons at Florida, I think probably because of the rib injury. They didn't want to put him out there on special teams last year down in Athens, as he was pseudo their top back at points of times a year ago. So I do think that's more of them trying to protect him than his lack of ability. I don't think it's a lack of ability at all as far as being a returner. The rest of the group, looking at it, Amani Bailey, he's back in Carolina for another season. He signed back on December 3rd to the practice squad. Then back in January on the 6th, he signed a reserve/future contract. So he's back here. Who is Amani Bailey? You ask. He played at TCU, was there when guys like Keandre Miller was in the backfield, and was it Murray DiMaccardo, something like that. I can't remember his last name. But those guys who helped to get to the national championship before getting destroyed by the Georgia Bulldogs. He did rush for 1,209 yards and 8 touchdowns at TCU in 2023. So he's back in the backfield. And then Karon Lynch-Adams, he's also here in Carolina as a UDFA. He played 6 years of college football, 2 at Rutgers, 3 at UMass, and then last year at Michigan State. His best season came back in 2023 with the Minutemen up there in Amherst, rushing for 1,157 yards and 12 touchdowns. And then last year at MSU had 649 yards and 2 touchdowns for the Spartans. So a guy coming off of his 2 best years in college, but 6 years of playing college football, 6 years of wear and tear, and 6 years of it taking you that long to get to this point. But hell, it's a dream come true. So congratulations to Karon Lynch-Adams, who is in this backfield as well here in Carolina. So how many guys are they going to keep in the backfield once we get to roster cut down day and potentially carrying throughout the season? Well, I'll tell you that here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. How many running backs are the Panthers going to keep once we get to initial 53-man roster cutdown day later on in August? Looking at last year, the Panthers only kept 3 guys on the initial 53, Chuba Hubbard, Miles Sanders, and Raheem Blackshear. And you look at that, only 2 who they really wanted to be out there as pure running backs in Chuba and in Miles. Now, Jonathan Brooks, he was on the non-football injury list due to that torn ACL he suffered his senior year at Texas. They knew he was going to be back in some point in time. We felt like maybe he'd be ready for training camp because that's at least what his agent told Ian Rappaport on draft day. That obviously was not the case, as he was not ready to go until I believe it was week 12 when they faced off against Kansas City following the bye week at home here in Charlotte. So knowing that he was going to miss some time, they were cool just keeping those three, knowing that Chuba and Miles would be the primary guys and Raheem was going to be their primary returner. But they did have, for the most part, last season, a fourth running back on the roster, whether it was as a practice squad guy or actually on the active roster. And that primarily was Mike Boone, who was active 9 weeks last season. Then you had 3 weeks where Jonathan Brooks was there. And then after that, kind of looking back at it, in my notes, I keep track of all the guys who are active week to week, but I don't have track of everybody who's on the roster every single week. So I can tell you at least 12 of the 17 weeks, they had 4 running backs on the active roster, but that does not mean that they're going to start off the season again after roster cutdown day with 4 backs on the roster. Now, breaking it down into tiers, something I did last year, didn't do on Monday, but which you didn't really need to do. Guaranteed roster spots, in my opinion. Obviously, Chuba, he signed a 4-year deal. He's not going anywhere. Rico Dowdle, he's not going anywhere. Those are RB1 and RB2, and maybe it's a 1A, 1B situation. I think that's still going to be Chuba as the top guy, with Rico being a really good dude who can spell them. And talking to Marcus Mosier again of Locked On Cowboys, go back and listen to that interview back from last month. He talked about how you looked at Rico, while he had a lot of successful runs, he didn't really break any 20-plus yard rushes. We've seen Chuba do that numerous times in his career here in Carolina, especially in that game in Germany, the winning touchdown against Arizona. He's a guy who can break those big runs for you, and you have a guy who can be pretty solid coming in as your second back in Rico. Trevor Etienne, I'm going to say he's safe as well. They spent a 4th-round pick on him. He'd have to come in and just be absolutely terrible. Now, yes, he's going to have to earn his way, but I don't think they're going to let him go, especially knowing that Rico Dowdle, unlikely going to be a Carolina Panther again in 2026. Jonathan Brooks, no idea what they're going to get out of him in 2026 and beyond. So you don't want to just be in a position where you only have Chuba Hubbard. You want to have another young, cost-controlled running back. So that's going to be Trevor Etienne. So those 3 guys, to me, are very clearly going to be on the roster. The other 2 guys, Amani Bailey and Kyron Lynch-Adams, they're going to be fighting for a practice squad opportunity, or they're just not going to be around. They might be UFL bound, but those are 2 guys I don't look at them necessarily having the best opportunity to make the team. But then roster bubble, Raheem Blackshear. I brought up the numbers, and I'll say them again, y'all. Like, looking at PFF, he had a 56.0 overall return grade, 173rd out of 212 players last season. Kickoff grade, 54.3, 163rd out of 187 players. Punt return grade, okay, solid, 62.8. That was 45th out of 85. So if he's coming back to be a punt returner, I can understand that. But with the kickoff rule having changed last year, it's very clear that Carolina wanted to find other options. And Jimmy Horn is someone who Dan Morgan reportedly had a lot of conviction about. And he may have said that. It might have been on the McAfee show, whatever it was. But that's somebody that Dan Morgan really liked. And that's someone who Jimmy Horn said himself when speaking to teams. And this was on Panthers.com, either with Cassidy or Darren. He said that at the combine, I don't think it was the combine, whenever he's speaking to teams, though, in a pre-draft process, that teams are talking to him about the kickoff rule because they saw him as a player who could do that for them. And his speed needs to be utilized in some way this upcoming year. Now, he missed some significant time throughout OTAs, mandatory minicamp with that hamstring, and that puts him behind the 8 ball as we head into training camp in 5 weeks' time or 4.5 weeks' time, however many weeks it's going to be. We'll be here sooner than I really needed to be. But either way, he's going to be the guy that's going to be really fighting for a return job. And Trevor Etienne, who again didn't return kicks last year, he'll be fighting for a return job. So those are 2 young guys who the Panthers just drafted, who I would think would be in good position special teams wise to usurp the return throne of Raheem Blackshear if he's even sitting on the throne at this point in time. So was not great last year. Raheem was not. The numbers bear it out. He's going to have to be a lot better. And Dave Canales talked about this last week, one of his final messages when it came to just the wide receiver roster numbers. And they kept 7 last year. And we'll get to receivers on Friday, on the show. But they kept 7 last year initially. Ended up only really with 5 throughout the season. But as far as the numbers go there, special teams are going to be important. And he talked about the preseason games will matter. Preseason games are going to matter for Raheem Blackshear. Training camp practice is going to matter for Raheem Blackshear. All of that is going to matter if he's going to be back on this roster again. So he's fighting guys like Jimmy Horn and really Trevor Etienne, who I think is safe, but he's fighting him to secure his spot as the 4th running back on this team. So Chuba, Rico, Trevor, they're going to be around. Raheem, big question mark as he's going to be battling for his opportunity. Imani Bailey, Kyron Lynch-Adams, practice squad or headed to the UFL or to Amazon or wherever. But both of those guys going to get opportunities. We'll see what they're able to do, especially late in some of these preseason games coming up here later on this summer. But that's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show for free over on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to hit me up over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council. No mailbag right now, but always down to answer any questions that y'all have via my DMs, or just go ahead and adding me on Twitter and also on Blue Sky. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding. I'll be back with y'all on Friday as we're talking about wide receivers, a very exciting group coming up this season. All that and more on Friday here on Locked On Panthers.